My characters are not the same, you shout at me. One's a woman, one's a man, one's unemployed, one's a successful CEO. They're all different. Not if you haven't thought about conflict. If you're gonna take the time to tell a story, then tell a story that matters. There's one thing you cannot help as a screenwriter: you revealing yourself on the page. But that's not always a good thing if it makes all of your characters exactly the same. And it takes me about 5 pages of reading a screenplay usually to figure out the personality of the writer. I mean, I can tell if they don't like confrontation, if they're going to be able to take notes, and whether they will just accept every note and roll over, or whether they're going to push back at every single note and say, oh no, my story is great, you're just misreading it. And the reason I can do that is because of how the characters within the story try to resolve the conflicts in their lives. We can more fully understand characters in any story by seeing how they deal with conflict. So imagine an apartment building's on fire. Henry is on the 7th floor and he has to get out of the building. So Henry grabs his laptop, his passport, some cash, and a few pairs of underwear, shoves them in a backpack, and heads out. But on the 5th floor, Henry hears a child screaming. Henry has a choice. And if Henry's a good guy, he's gonna go and get the kid. If not, he's gonna keep going. And we suddenly learn a ton about Henry by how he handles the conflict that he's faced with. And this happens in real life too. I mean, we learn the true nature of people by watching how they handle conflict. And we really can't become good friends with someone until we see how each other handles conflict, because conflict reveals the true nature of people and of characters. But here's the problem. Every single one of us uses different strategies to try and solve the problems that we're facing. And we have both instinctive and intentional strategies that we pull from. Now, the instinctive strategies you've probably heard of: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And there's a host of information online if you want more information about those. But these instinctive strategies are our natural reactions when faced with any difficult situation. Now, these don't mean we always do these kinds of behaviors, but I, for example, am more aligned with the flight response, which is associated with workaholism, by the way. My instinctive reaction is that if I just work harder, I can solve the problem. So I disengage and I'm like, I gotta go solve the problem. If I analyze the problem enough and keep working toward a goal, I'll eventually figure it out. And honestly, I mean, this has served me well many times in my life, but it is also not the best response to every kind of conflict. I tend to take all of the blame. I assume it's always my fault. I assume that I just didn't work hard enough, and it doesn't take long to travel down this rabbit hole for you to see how dangerous that kind of thinking can be. But the thing is, that is my instinctive reaction to a conflict situation. And you have one too. There are things you always do when faced with any kind of conflict. And if you know which one it is, I mean, drop it in the comments below. There isn't a wrong answer on this one. Actually, the only wrong answer is not knowing which one is your instinctive response to conflict. If you don't know, here's one way you can find out: is go read a recent script and analyze, see, I like that word, analyze how your characters are trying to solve their problems. And this is why I can figure out the personality of the writer, because every character in the story is trying to solve any conflict they face in the exact same way. So while you might be thinking that the best way to make sure that characters are distinctive is to make sure they have different goals and different life situations and different priorities, but you can do that all day long in every script, and your characters will all still feel exactly the same. Why? Because they're all acting instinctively in the exact same way to solve a problem. And that's what you have to fix, because your characters are all exactly the same if they deal with conflict in exactly the same way. So if you've got a Henry and a Walter and a Sergio and a Pep, and each of them are in an apartment building that's on fire, and all of them, when leaving, stop when they hear a screaming child and they go get the child, okay, it doesn't matter if Henry's a CEO and Walter's unemployed and Sergio inherited $1 billion and Pep is a homeless man squatting in the building. They will all come across as exactly the same because they solve the conflict in exactly the same way. Instead, Henry saves the child, Walter ignores the child and instead saves a puppy. Sergio starts to go help the child, but abandons his plan and kicks the puppy. while Pep drops what few precious possessions he has and saves both the child and the puppy. Okay, now they're different characters, but not because of all the other stuff in their life. They're different because of how they resolve the conflict that they're facing. And when faced with a traumatic situation, every character, just like people in real life, are going to have an instinctive reaction. But that's the key word, reaction. But there's also an intentional way people can try to resolve a conflict, and that is to respond to the crisis by choosing how to act. So maybe you have a character who only reacts instinctively, but you might also have a character who initially reacts one way, but then chooses to respond to the situation in a thoughtful, wise, or otherwise intentional manner. And while the reactions, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, can be placed in kind of 4 quadrants, the responses are more a combination of 2 things: power and relationship. And characters can kind of move to different places on this chart. The fluidity here means that we are more cooperative if we have more power, because we see ourselves as someone who has responsibility in the matter because we are in relationship with the other person. But if we're against the other person, then we are more controlling and authoritative. Now, if we have less power, but we're in relationship, we are more cooperative. But that's because we're dependent on the other person because we don't have power. And if we don't have power and we're against the other person, then we just merely tolerate them and we're unhappy about whatever they suggest, even if it's a good idea. Now, here's how understanding this can help you create unique characters. When you are figuring out your characters for any story, don't spend a bunch of time figuring out what happened to them in 3rd grade or what grade they got on a history exam, because much of that is a waste of time. Instead, figure out what are their instinctive reactions to any crisis. What would they do without thinking? I mean, what's their instinct? And then figure out who they want to be in relationship with and who they don't. And in those relationships, do they have more power or less? And if you can answer those basic questions for each character and you make sure your answers are unique for each character, then voila! You'll have unique and distinctive characters. This is how you can have a self-contained story where all of the characters are, for example, jurors for a trial. They're all basically the same, but some have power, some don't. Some have influence, some don't. Some freeze when confronted, others are happy to fight back, while still others just want everyone to get along. The way they deal with conflict is different. And you also might be thinking that power only has to do with money. Like, if you have money, then you have power. But that's not true. One character can be rich and think they have power, but another can have influence and have power that way. So which one? The one with money or the one with influence is the more powerful? And now you have conflict because you can put in a scene a CEO of a company who has a bunch of resources and position arguing with the leader of the labor union who has a lot of influence. That is some great conflict because now each character is going to try and exert their power and influence to resolve the conflict. But there's one other piece that you need, and that's the strategy that each character chooses to employ. Now, I do want to point out that I'm really just scratching the surface here in this video, and I dive much deeper into creating unique and distinctive characters in my screenwriting fast track course. But that course isn't for you if you aren't serious and committed to really getting better at the craft. So if you're frustrated and tired of just not making the progress that you're wanting to make as a screenwriter, you should check out the fast track. And I've got some exciting things coming to the fast track. In short, it's getting an upgrade. So be sure to like and subscribe if you're finding value in this video, and hit the bell so you can get notified when my next video drops. I really can't wait to tell you about the upgrades to the fast track course, which is already a robust work at your own pace course meant to get you on the path towards screenwriting mastery. And is it a ridiculous idea for you to make more progress as a screenwriter in the next few months than you've made in the last year or more? I mean, if you don't think so, be sure to check out the link below and change your strategy for how you improve as a screenwriter. And changing strategies is the secret sauce of creating unique and interesting characters. So imagine you're 10 years old and you really want a puppy. And if you're like one of my daughters who wanted a puppy, you first broach the topic by simply asking, can we get a puppy? I mean, that's the simplest option. It might not go your way, And so you ask again and again. But at some point, either your parent tells you to stop asking, or you realize that this strategy isn't working. You decide to alter your tactics, to change your strategy, because you aren't getting what you want. So you have to try something new. And remember, a story is about someone who wants something badly. They're having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. That trouble that they're having, okay, that's the conflict. And they are reacting in instinctive ways at first. And then they move to becoming more intentional and changing their tactics. So if you're like one of my daughters, when she was 10, you might drop some random comments like, it sure would be nice to have a puppy today. Or if you want me to be more active, you could get me a puppy because I would have to walk her. Or you get more savvy and you name the dog, making the dog personal. Then it's not just a puppy, it's Skittles. And Skittles is cute. And Skittles would be my friend. And when that fails, you make a visual presentation and host a family meeting to persuade the parents of all the benefits of getting a puppy and how you will benefit and become a better person as a result of pet ownership. This is what we do in real life. We change strategies when we aren't getting what we want. And your characters have to do the same thing. If they keep doing the same thing over and over, okay, that's boring to watch, and it makes the character flat. And if another character is trying to resolve their own conflicts in similar ways, okay, well now those two characters, they seem exactly alike. Making characters unique is not just about who they are as people. That's where most writers stop. It's also ensuring how they try and resolve the conflicts in their lives and making sure that those strategies are unique from the other characters in the story. So if you have a character trying to solve a problem exactly like another character, okay, that should be a flag to you. But what new writers tend to do is they make a character solve their problems, not just in exactly the same way as another character, but in exactly the same way as every character in the story. And coincidentally, it's exactly like how the author tends to try and solve their own problems in their real life. That's how I know what a writer's personality is like, because every character in their story is reacting the exact same way to the conflicts that they're facing. And when characters begin reacting the exact same way, the writer is coming through too much. And that's not a good thing. But don't put all the brakes on. Your voice still has to come through. Your writing voice is critical to any story you tell because it helps to make the story uniquely your own. And if you aren't sure how to find or hone your own writing voice, you can watch this video right here. If you want to dive deeper into creating characters among a bunch of other things, be sure to check out the Screenwriting Fast Track. And when you tell a story that matters. See you later.